Hi there, it's Fred Sweet. Thanks for tuning in to Guitar Media, and welcome to Guitar Media's Marshall High Gain Mod video. We're here today to take a look at this 1970 Marshall Super PA with the High Gain Sweet Mod. Okay, please keep in mind that there's potentially 500 volts under the hood here, so safety first. You definitely want to make sure the amp's off and not connected or not plugged into a power source when you go to work on it. And the first thing I did actually is check these positions right here for voltage. You shouldn't be getting any voltage here. Okay, so when this amp is stock, volume 3 and volume 4 are like channels in a PA mixer. They're separate channels. What we've done here is we now have cascaded volume 4 into volume 3. So now we're driving volume 3 with volume 4. For the clean recordings or the non-modded recordings, we plug the guitar straight into volume 3 just like you normally would without even jumping the channels. And then for when we're driving volume 3 with volume 4, we plug straight into volume 4. And then what we do here is we actually plug in a jumper. And what this does is actually just lifts the signal from ground and effectively increasing the gain even further. So for a quick look under the hood here, we got the PA. This baby's stock right here, and what we got right here is, if you can see where I'm pointing to. So this is going to be volume 1 out right here and volume 2 out right here. So those are actually coming to right here, and coming in right here we got volume 1 and volume 2 coming in right here. And so this is actually, in this amp, it jumps over to this area, and then you can see this black wire actually goes to what would be V2 in a regular super lead or a super bass is V3 in this amp, which is the tone stack. But now that we've established the stock PA wiring, now we're going to take a look at the cascaded wiring and how we changed it from stock parallel to cascaded. So over here we have volume 3 out coming out here and volume 4 coming out here. And volume 3 comes to here at this resistor position, and volume 4 comes to here at this position. Now you can see that volume 3 resistor goes into the tone stack, but what we've done is we've removed volume 4 resistor position to the low sensitivity input 3 position here. And so with this resistor that was going to here is now, the other leg of it is now going to the low sensitivity input resistor on volume 3. And so what we've done here is you can see this wire was actually connected to here to this terminal, and that was the low sensitivity wire. What I've done is actually just connected it here with this resistor, and that's just because if I ever want to go back, I can just disconnect it and put it right back there, and I don't even have, it's already in the amp, it's already connected at the bottom here on the other end. So such a simple mod, such a simple way to get gain. I also wanted to point out that not only does this amp just have like the regular base value from coming off the cathode going to ground, but it also has, if you look here, you can actually see the yellow. So the yellow wires jumped here. So this is actually where the other side of the tube is also going to ground in this very same position. In a super lead, you know, this would actually normally be coming out right here, and you can see where someone has actually had it there, and it would be a 0.68 capacitor going from this position to this position with also a resistor in a lead amplifier. And so I just want to point out, so without this 0.68 that would normally be here in a lead amp, you're just going to get a cleaner sound and less of a mids and the highs and the treble. And also, because obviously I haven't tried this mod with the lead, you know, I don't know how it would work. You know, I'm not even really 100% sure that it even would work, but I don't see why not. And then another thing too, in a lot of lead amps, we actually see even another resistor jumped here somewhere, or no, excuse me, 0.68 jumped here somewhere in the mixer stage, and that's also another 0.68, another boost in the mids and the high frequencies, and that's something that's not in this amp, and so we're just not going to get as much gain without the mod in this amp. for voltage. You shouldn't be getting any voltage here. And the fact that there wasn't any voltage there, I knew I was safe to change the signal path. And the other thing about this is, now that channel 4 is cascaded into channel 3, you do not want to try to jump from channel 4 into channel 3. This can create an audio loop, a feedback loop, and so while I didn't try to do it, I don't recommend it. But volume 3 or high sensitivity input still operates normally. And I just want to go over quickly some of the values that they did here. So as you can see, we got the dog bone bright cap here, and this is a stock thing in a super lead. So someone had actually done this before we got the amp. And so apparently channel 3 and 4 were set up for a super lead. We have a 0.018 capacitor here, which is a little smaller than a 0.022, so you're going to get a little less bass response, a little less gain, a little cleaner of a sound, and then a 0.0022 in this position, which is also a common coupling cap for a lead output, or coupling cap for the lead channel in a super lead amp. Once again, just less bass than a 0.022, less gain, and this configuration of the lower value capacitors paired with this bright capacitor, what happens with the gain, when you turn up the gain, a lot of times you get more bass and more bass than you need, and it can become mushy. And these smaller value capacitors have allowed the amplifier to really hold tight in the bass department in the bottom end, and really also allowed the amp to really shine when the gain is turned up and still have a nice bright sound and not become under a pillow. And so I'm very content so far. And another thing too, typically we're going to run volume 3 all the way on 10 when we use the cascading mod. And this is basically because it's like it's not even there. So you're going to use volume 4 as your gain, and you're going to find with a lot of high output guitars that you're not going to be able to turn it all the way up because it gets microphonic before you get it turned all the way up. And so that's why we just go to the point where we get some microphonics and kind of back off it a little from there and go from there. For me, the story goes back 15 or 20 years or so, but in reality, it all started in the early 70s when Fender would go to the master volume on the twin reverb and so many other amps, as well as so many other amp techs that would also add a master volume to the amp. And this whole, Jose Mod guy and so many others, I actually call it the Van Halen mod, and it was just something that eventually turned into the 2203 and the 2204, where they cascade the gain stages in a very similar fashion to the way I've done it here, but it's almost if a little overly engineered, if you will, because you have to keep in mind that the JCM 800 came at a time when the super lead had already evolved into the lead circuit that we all know is not the quote-unquote plexi circuit or the super bass circuit. And this mod that I've done here, it kind of sort of rolls back the hands of time. So we're cascading in an earlier fashion. But anyways, I just wanted to go over. So I bought a 1967-68 Marshall Super or Major. It was a 200 watt. And someone had actually done what I called the Van Halen mod in the 80s. And it's where they cascaded the gain stages in a very similar fashion with a post-phase inverter master volume. And the amplifier was very high gain, and I was not able to turn the master volume all the way up and really use the gain that the amp had because it was really just too much. And so for years, I actually had different Marshall Major amps and experimented and researched these circuits for years and the JCM 800 and the Super Lead to try to figure out just how we're going to make this work. And like I said, I couldn't make it work. Finally figured it out, and I'm so glad that I did. And really, I think maybe it's definitely safe to say that we're late to the party. So sadly, I parted ways with my 67-68 Marshall Major amp. And really, at the time, I just sort of kind of figured, front end overdrive is just not my thing. And that's when you use the master volume and just get the overdrive from the preamp and the front end of the amp and the phase inverter, whether it's a pre-phase inverter or post-phase inverter master volume. I just thought, hey, output tube breakup, that's where it's at. That's my thing. That's my go-to. And so I just wasn't able to get it. And so that's why I moved on. And as far as other amp circuits go, like the JCM 800, I just want to say that, with the JCM 800, we got the 0.68 capacitors going to ground. And the way that they did it with the lead circuit, it's just so much brighter that it actually isolates you a lot more to a certain frequency response. And it basically puts you where you're going to have to use quite a lot more bass and just turn the amp up. And it's just more boosted in the highs and mids. And it's just a much brighter sound altogether. Whereas I find this to be so much more well balanced. And really, I'm able to use a Stratocaster or a Les Paul, either one. And while we do run the bass on 10 with the Stratocaster and turn the bass off with the Les Paul, we do absolutely have somewhere to go. And we also run the presence on 5 with both guitars, which also gives us someplace to go. So we're not actually locked in. It seems to be working great with all these different guitars. And we also notice that the high gain pickups, you just the whole thing is without a master volume, you can only use so much gain. So you're going to turn the guitar up and eventually it's just going to become microphonic and you just don't need any more gain. And so in that case, like for example, with the EMG 81 on the high gain setting, you just don't need the mod, and there's not enough of a difference really to even say, although it does obviously add another stage and the sound is different, it's not, less is more in my opinion. So to each his own on that. Whereas with the lower output guitars, it's obviously much more apparent and much more usable. The extra gain is much more usable. And we also notice that it doesn't work as well with tremolo because the gain actually deletes the tremolo, because the tremolo is a raise in volume and a lower in volume. And what having high gain does is actually brings all the volume, the low and the high volume, to the same volume. So it sort of normalizes all your volume, which is very interesting, kind of like compression. So we started off the session plugging the Strat straight in, and then we went to the Worm for the phaser effect, and then we went to the Jim Dunlop original Crybaby for the wah-wah effect on a few riffs. Then we jumped back to the Worm for the tremolo that we noticed wasn't as good, and finally the vibrato, which interesting enough seemed to sound good for the first time ever. humbucker guitars, we actually just plugged straight into channel 2, which is a .022 capacitor, and the stock value for this amplifier, we run the presence on 5, we got the bass off, mid-range on 10, treble on 10, and we run volume 2 on 10. And then for the modification, we go back to plugging the guitar into channel 4 and then running the jumper to lift the ground on channel 3 for even more gain. And what we've noticed here is that high gain guitars, you just don't hear as much of a difference, and with lower output pickups, you can hear a much bigger difference in the sound. And the reason why we did it this way and different than the other guitar is because we're actually just looking for a difference in the frequency response, and we found it to be very balanced and very similar. The speakers we're playing today are the Celestion T1217s, G12H here. Our close microphone at 24 inches is the Sennheiser E835, and our room microphone on top of the cab is the Natty RSM4 ribbon microphone. The purpose of the Stratocaster demonstrations was just to showcase the amount of difference in gain without the mod and then with the mod, and then the way the amp behaves with certain modulation effects. The purpose of the humbucker demonstrations here are not, it's not actually to demonstrate the difference in the gain. The purpose is to demonstrate the difference in the frequency response from the unmodded and stock position in the amplifier of volume 2, and then the difference in frequency response when we do use the gain, the cascaded gain stage engaged. And really what we're looking for here is actually we're wondering, okay, how does this amp with this mod and this cascaded gain stage, how does it respond to lower output humbuckers versus, say, medium output humbuckers to, say, versus active and very high output humbuckers. And we found that it's obviously much more noticeable. The frequency response and gain is much more noticeable with the low output humbuckers, and much more usable across the board, I would say. Even with medium and high output, we found it really even just not necessary, unless maybe with the medium ones, maybe for like some pinch harmonics or something like that, you might have a little advantage there. you'd like to support the channel or see some of our videos ranking higher in the Google and YouTube search engines, please like, comment, and subscribe, as this is absolutely free and the best way to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and check our channel for our latest videos.